Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to our live webinar on the status of the Missouri market opening up during this unprecedented time. Thank you so much to all of our panelists here today with us, including Dan Roda, CEO of Abaca, Karin Spinks-Chester, the Vice President of McHugh Trade, the trade association in Missouri, and also the CEO of Midwest Cannabis Expos. And thank you to McHugh for joining us, who's an attorney at Joseph Hollander and Kraft, and also the president of Vertical Enterprises. So we're going to start things up by having everyone just go ahead and introduce yourselves. Dan, why don't you kick us off?
I'm the CEO of Abaca. We are a digital financial platform that connects cannabis businesses with bank accounts, payment processing, and lending.
I'm Karin Spinks-Chester, and I'm the Vice President of the Missouri Medical Cannabis Trade Association, and I'm the CEO of Midwest Canna Expos.
Chris, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Vertical Enterprises and your practice as a cannabis attorney?
Sure, happy to. I am an attorney with Joseph Hollander and Kraft. We have, as part of the firm, a nice-sized cannabis law services division, and I'm head of that. And then my other job is president, co-founder of Vertical Enterprises, which is a vertically licensed entity with a cultivation, manufacturing, and dispensary operation standing up in St. Joe, Missouri.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining us. I know this is a really wild and crazy time for any industry to be opening up. Cannabis is faced with its own unique set of challenges. And I just wanted to ask, from your perspective, looking at other markets opening up, like Oklahoma and Arkansas, how you think this is affecting the markets in Missouri. Dan, why don't you start us off with your assessment?
Sure. So, anytime a new state opens up its medical cannabis industry, it's one of those things that's interesting because every state has its own little wrinkle, its own take on what is the best way to start a system from the ground up. And there are always going to be differing opinions on what is the best way to distribute licenses, whether a lottery or perhaps a merit criteria-based system should be put into effect, or as they did in Oklahoma, perhaps you leave it wide open and leave it to the forces of the free market. And so every market's a little bit different. Missouri, from the legislation that was passed, seemed to really strike a very, very good balance there of having a cap, but having it be a relatively high cap that still allows for a very robust market with a lot of choices for patients. However, as we saw here in Arkansas and as we saw in other states and as people are experiencing in Missouri right now, anytime somebody at the state awards licenses to a certain group and doesn't award licenses to another group, well, this is America, and as Chris, I'm sure, will also agree, I'm also a fellow attorney, so I don't take this negatively. It is your right, in fact, to sue in a situation like that, and many people do. These lawsuits are natural, but they can certainly result in some delays in the marketplace. One of the lawsuits we had here in Arkansas resulted in a significant delay. The good news is, at least from what I've seen, and I'd love to hear Chris's take on this as well, though there are some protests that have been filed to some of the license award decisions, and some of these may be getting heard administratively, and some of these may be getting heard in court. It doesn't seem to me like any of these seem like they are going to be the factor or a factor in delaying the launch of the industry as a whole.
Gotcha.
And so, Chris, if you wouldn't mind weighing in on that as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, happy to. I don't have any disagreement with that statement. I don't see the appeals or any of the lawsuits that have been filed so far. Some of them might be successful, but I don't think there are going to be any delays in the causing any delays to the license entities that are out there right now. The delays that I see specifically from the global pandemic that we have, COVID-19 or coronavirus or what have you, are really two. One is funding problems for cultivators mostly, and the other is delay in regulation and compliance and communication there at the state level. Those are the two problems that I know Vertical is struggling with every day. Investors that can't meet their obligations that because of this pandemic, or looking for new investors that just aren't there, banking relationships that are either stalled out or have disappeared, and then just difficulty just because, you know, I can't meet with people from the state here in Missouri. It's difficult for them to communicate. It's just the way it is right now, and that does slow things down.
Very interesting. Karin, is there any other notable changes, delays, setbacks because of the coronavirus that you're noticing from the industry standpoint in Missouri?
The biggest things that I've heard about are issues with getting documents notarized. The state did come up with a solution for that. It's important to note, though, that Missouri doesn't actually have a cap on licenses. Missouri actually has minimums on the licenses. So what Missouri has issued so far, those are the minimums. At any time, they could actually issue more licenses. And I think that some of the folks that are appealing and are suing are counting on that because realistically, the state could issue more licenses in order to satisfy lawsuits. So.
Gotcha. Do you think that opening the Missouri market during this global pandemic is going to have any lasting effects on the market, or are we just looking at delays?
The delays that I think we're going to deal with most are the things that operators have to deal with. And Chris can probably speak to this a little more, but he talked about funding and then communication and that sort of thing. All of the dates that the state was required to meet according to the constitutional amendment, those have all passed. So everything now can be handled through regulatory processes. So being able to, you know, we did a lot of the rollout before the pandemic started. And honestly, at this point, we are going to all have to figure out what new normal looks like. I don't think that things will be going back. I mean, we fully expect to see dispensaries opening towards the end of the summer. I'll be interested to see how operators handle changes in protocol so they can deal with patients coming into dispensaries to get medication and that sort of thing. I think that trying to get paperwork filed and things like that are going to be probably the most difficult things for people to manage.
And Chris, what are the particular areas that operators need to pay attention to right now? How has the pandemic impacted or influenced regulatory matters?
I think it very much depends on what kind of operation you are. If you're a cultivation operation that requires a lot of funding and a lot of preparation, if you're building a new building or retrofitting another building that already exists, a lot of design documents, it's just a big operation to step up, particularly since you've got a minimum cap of 30,000 square feet in Missouri of flowering canopy. And if you have 3 licenses, that's 90,000 square feet. That's a huge facility. I think you're struggling getting through all that, just the logistics of getting through it in this pandemic. And then as I mentioned, the funding issues and the communication people are experiencing with the state. If you're a dispensary, I think you're more concerned about where are you going to get your product? Where is this product going to come from? What cultivators are going to be successful at getting open first, and what kind of product are they going to have? And then are you going to be able to, you're probably going to beat the state a little bit on your ability to get open. So when are you going to be able to get that commencement inspection that allows you to actually be open? And then again, when you're open, are you going to be empty, or are you going to have anything to sell?
Do you think that there are any lessons from markets that are operating right now in neighboring states like Arkansas or neighbors in Oklahoma, changes to dispensaries or to cultivation facilities because of COVID-19 that you will be instituting in your own organization, or that other operators and licensees will be taking a page from these other folks' books when they do open?
Yeah, I think I'm a little partial to Missouri's program. I think it is a superior program from a regulatory standpoint, and I think it's really well designed, intentionally or otherwise, to deal with something like what we're experiencing right now. Home delivery is not only allowed, it's a constitutional right. It's part of the right to access for Missouri residents. So home delivery will be there. All of this curbside pickup and drive-through stuff, I think, can be worked through. And I think the Department of Health has indicated a real willingness to work through those issues and keep an open mind about them. There's a drive-through issue that we're working through right now to try and get people, if they didn't have a drive-through in their original plan, the ability to get these dispensaries a drive-through options so that we can accommodate people who, we're in a pandemic, don't want to enter the building, can't enter the building for whatever reason. So I'm real optimistic about Missouri's ability from a regulatory standpoint to accommodate something like this in the future. I hope it doesn't happen again or isn't as bad, but if it does, I think we'll be all right. I think people will be queuing off Missouri. It's just that we're not open yet, so we don't have the chance to demonstrate any of that.
Well, that's a great point, Chris. It's also really an opportunity, as it would seem. In a sense, it's fortunate timing in that the Missouri operators, not only are they not open, most of them have not gone too far down the road in construction to have reached a point where it would be impractical to, say, modify your building plans to add that drive-through lane. It certainly seems like drive-throughs and curbside pickup and even delivery are becoming part of the equation where they weren't necessarily anticipated or permitted by regulators in a number of other states. Operators are having, in some cases, to go to extreme capital costs and other measures to now modify their operations to meet this new normal in other states. It's probably a good thing for Missouri operators now that they can amend their plans accordingly at this juncture. And it sounds like, from what you're telling me, that the state is being very flexible in changing regulations and allowing operators to amend their plans after licenses have been awarded. So that's fantastic. That's really encouraging to hear. And it sounds to me like some of these changes, in fact, are then going to become permanent operational changes for a lot of people as we go on operating in the age of pandemics, such as it were.
Dan, you've been dealing with clients, dispensaries, ancillary companies, cultivators in multiple states all around the United States from a banking standpoint, banking, lending, and payment processing. What are the creative, really interesting solutions that you've seen folks implement in their medical marijuana operations that you think Missouri can learn from?
So one of the things we've seen that has been interesting in all retail sectors, and not just medical cannabis dispensaries, but goods retailers, restaurants, grocery stores, et cetera, has been this rise of delivery and been this rise of pickup and these other alternative options that are changing the paradigm from what had been our norm, which is to go out and go to the store and browse and make a purchase in person, or consume in person if we're talking about a restaurant or something like that. Here in the cannabis industry, that is also true, but we have the added challenge of being in an industry that is still illegal under federal law and therefore, among other things, denied access to the major credit card rails. That is to say, the networks of Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover. And so here in states like Arkansas and other states where Abaca operates, we have heeded the call of our public officials who have implored businesses to, in fact, adopt and change their practices to adopt a contactless form of payment. Well, that's a lot easier to do if you can accept, one of those new chip-embedded American Express cards that you can just wave sort of near the terminal, and thanks to a near-frequency Bluetooth magic thing that goes on there, it beeps, and the transaction processes. Well, we don't have that right in cannabis. And so there are alternatives that have been developed. There are some app-based payment methods that were around in the cannabis industry prior to this pandemic, but in light of the pandemic especially, we've seen a lot of renewed interest in them. And here at Abaca, we've partnered with a company called Cann that has been doing contactless payments in cannabis for several years now. And we've launched in 4 states the ability to pay with no physical contact at our dispensaries that we're banking. And this is enabling customers to do several different things and enabling operators to do several different things. If you had a delivery window, for example, the payment could have been processed prior to handing the order out the window. If you don't have a delivery window but are perhaps dropping off an order in a patient's car, the curbside model, well, again, you can have the transaction be completed before your employee ever leaves your facility with the product. And so that's mitigating the risk of theft of product there, and it's also mitigating having to transact in cash in a parking lot, which is dangerous aside from the potential contamination issues. And so we're happy to be a part of this shift and to enable our customers where we can to use technology to really change the way that they're operating, whether that ends up being a temporary change or in fact a permanent one.
Very interesting. And looking at some dispensaries that are operating and knowing Missouri's struggling through all of these changes due to COVID-19, plus just the opening of a medical marijuana market in general, it seems like an insurmountable hill, but the industry moves on, progress is being made. Karin, do you think that Missouri is on pace as it would have been without COVID-19, or do you think that it has sustained any delays that would fundamentally change the industry?
Well, I think that everything is going to fundamentally change, not just the cannabis industry. I think we are definitely going to feel the impact a lot more. We don't have the advantage of being able to access the same kind of loans and financial resources that other businesses do. Our rollout, the delays that we're going to experience now are not going to be, I don't think, because of the state necessarily. I think they're going to be construction delays. Everything is just taking longer. I think it's something that you used to be able to do in a week is going to take 2 weeks now. So, and a lot of that, and I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. Monday, the state is supposed to open back up on a very limited basis, and seeing how those changes and modifications to the way we're sheltering at home will have some kind of impact on the way that the system continues to roll out. So, I mean, there's a lot of unknowns right now. It's going to a lot depend on how people handle this and how the state continues to handle it. They've been really, really great so far. They have through the entirety of implementation of the program. And they've been really great about participating and helping us educate people in the industry about the delays and what's going to be happening. So, that's been really to our benefit.
Gotcha. What do you project? This could be a question from everyone, but Chris, how are you being able to project the volume to meet consumer demand now? There's been reports that sales have been very strong in the cannabis industry. How are you able to project that in light of this pandemic?
Yeah, it's not easy, but everywhere you look, there's a hunger, there's a demand for marijuana. Americans like their marijuana, and you see the wholesale price of flower being very stable in many states and sticking above even $4,000 a pound, which all of that indicates a real lack of supply and a real high demand and price stability. So the projections that we make really we don't count on having leftover marijuana in the business that we can't sell. What we're trying to find is what's the market price going to be, because the idea is that it all gets sold. It's just a matter of how much it will sell for wholesale. So it just looks so strong. The demand looks so strong, and the supply, I think, I agree with Karin wholeheartedly. I think there are some cultivators that because of this are either going to be drastically delayed in Missouri or simply not be able to get off the ground. So I just don't think the supply is there. I don't think, of all the problems Missouri is going to experience, demand, in my mind, is not one of them.
Gotcha. And Dan, looking at other states and other markets, and we're coming off of the infamous 420 weekend, how have sales been holding up through this global pandemic?
You know, we've seen some interesting things. In all of the states where Abaca is operating, these are primarily medical markets. Illinois also has an adult use market. These are generally not states where tourist travel has been a driver for cannabis demand. Whereas in Colorado and especially Nevada, the tourist travel is a much larger component in the demand landscape. Some of the impacts in some of those states have been different, but here in the heartland, in Arkansas, Oklahoma, Illinois, you know, what we saw was an interesting effect where first, as people were beginning to, let's say, stockpile certain goods in their homes that they might require if they were going to be confined there for 30 days or longer, well, sure, we all saw the national stories about people hoarding toilet paper. In many cases, it seems they were also hoarding cannabis, although when you use the word hoarding, it implies they're perhaps buying a longer supply, and so you'd see this bump in sales, but maybe you'd see it taper off as people have purchased in the beginning of the month, you know, enough to get them through the month, whereas typically they'd maybe only purchase a week or two at a time. And so we saw a boost at the beginning of the pandemic, and then something interesting happened. The government issued stimulus checks to the vast majority of Americans, and so instead of seeing that taper off, we saw another boost. And then 420 happened, which even in medical cannabis markets, 420 is still a very big and important sales day, and it is widely celebrated among both adult use cannabis consumers and cannabis patients who have been able to achieve the right to legally purchase and consume cannabis in their home states. And so we saw a third boost in the states where we operate, where that 420 Monday was one of the biggest Mondays of all time for our operators. And so I think Chris said it best. Americans just like their cannabis and seem to have an unending demand for it. And so, you know, as we enter a recession in so many other industries, I know I, for one, am considering myself fortunate to be working in an industry that certainly has the appearances of being heartily recession resistant.
Chris, do you have similar, do you agree with Dan on that as an operator, as a retailer? Do you have the same confidence in the industry?
I have confidence in demand. I have confidence in the patients and the patient numbers in Missouri. I have some confidence in the lack of supply. We're just seeing a lot of difficulties with cultivators being able to make their timelines and make their funding requirements and such. So yes, in short, I agree wholeheartedly. I think the trick with a cultivation is getting open and supplying very nice quality product. It's not about, you're not worried about, are you going to be able to sell it?
How are the patient certifications going in Missouri? Are we seeing an uptick in those, or how is that process going?
They've been pretty steady since the beginning. We've maybe slowed down just a little bit, but we're at 45,000, I believe, and Karin can correct, she keeps closer track on that than I do, but we have not seen the uptick that other states have seen at a certain point in their growth. We probably won't see that until we see some dispensaries and some supply. There's just no reason for someone who hasn't already sought out their card really to do it now, because that retail market hasn't opened up. So I suspect, you know, in 6 months or so, we'll probably see well over 100,000 would be my thought.
Wow. Karin, how has the state handled folks that have gotten their medical marijuana certification? How has the state handled that? Are they delaying the issuance of those or extending the time frame those are valid due to this pandemic, or what's the situation?
The Missouri law requires a physician certification and renewal every year. That hasn't changed yet. I do not know whether or not they will make an extension like that. Cards were first issued in June of last year was when the rules and everything came out. So they may make a decision about that fairly soon. A lot of patients, I kind of track a lot of the patient groups online because I'm a patient. And so a lot of patients don't want to get their cards. Chris is right. They don't want to get their cards until they can walk into a dispensary and purchase material. But there are a lot of patients who are applying to grow at home. That's happening. And that's happening a lot. And I actually think that the pandemic is making people consider that as an option more so than before because they are afraid that cultivations will be delayed, product will be delayed hitting the market. And so people are reconsidering, hey, maybe I want to go ahead and put a little bit of a grow in my basement. I can do it legally. So why not? You know? It'll be interesting to see how that plays out as the market comes into full development. And also, even if you can't walk into a dispensary and buy product, I'm protected from being arrested because I have a patient card. So I always really encourage people to go ahead and get their card now, even though it's an annual renewal. It's also really important. We worked really hard to pass this law, and it's also really important that we continue to support that and function in a legal way. So I really hope that more patients will continue to get their cards. Almost 45,000, all the projections from the beginning, we've already blown all those numbers out of the water. And we recently had an issue where someone in the legislature tried to block telehealth certifications. That managed to get, that went away. And if that comes back in, I honestly think this pandemic will stop that. I mean, I think everybody now realizes the importance of being able to allow people to have healthcare via telehealth visit. And I think that can help increase the numbers too.
Karin, what do you think? You just said that you've blown away all the projections and numbers as far as patients go. What do you think a key to your success has been?
Our constitutional amendment had huge grassroots support, and I really think that is the key. I also think that Missouri was really, really ready for medical marijuana about 10 years before the Missouri legislature was ready for medical marijuana. And so when we collected signatures to put this on the ballot, I mean, we collected over 100,000 signatures more than we needed to even get it on the ballot. And then when we voted, we passed by a huge margin, and a lot of people here were really ready for it. We'd been working on it for years prior. So it just, once everybody was able to go get certified, I mean, a lot of people just, they went out and did it right away. So I think that's a big reason why we have the support we have in the program.
Well, that's great. And Chris, I bet you're so ready to serve these patients their medicine and get open. What steps are y'all taking to make sure, specifically to make sure that patients feel safe and they feel confident in purchasing their medicine?
Well, the global pandemic aside, you know, and talking about store environment, and Vertical only has one dispensary in their vertical or in the business plan. But that aside, what we've emphasized is the vertical nature of our business, where we have control of the cultivation, the manufacturing aspect, and the dispensary. We can control all that, and we have a lot of quality control there. We see it all happen. We're making the product, we're growing the product, and then we're having it in our dispensary. So we can guarantee that it's going to meet your requirements. It's going to be what you want it to be, and it's going to be made in an environmentally sound and ethical manner. Beyond that, I think everyone needs to understand it's a developing market. So we probably won't be able to come out of the chute with a lot of the products that people maybe want or are looking for that are a little more processed. I think at the beginning, we're just concentrating on getting high quality flower out to the market as soon as possible. And then some of those more processed products can come later. What we don't want to do, and what I see some Missouri cultivators trying to do, because they want to get to the market so quick and they want to be fast and they want to be first, is put out some stuff that we wouldn't feel comfortable putting out, just because I wouldn't want it as a consumer, as a patient. Not that it's not usable, it's and healthy and safe. It's just it's a little bit lower quality.
Gotcha. And I think that's so important for a brand to come out with product that they're confident in, because that first experience that a patient has could really influence their decisions on down the road. So that's a really good point that you brought up, Chris. How are you developing? Have you changed your product line at all given this, or have you kind of stayed on the same course?
Because we've always viewed this as a very hard thing to do, standing up a indoor cultivation facility, and we're all indoor. We don't have any greenhouses, that has large 5,000 square foot bloom rooms and has 6 of those, so 30,000 square feet total. That's just a big business to stand up, and the less complication you can have there, the better. If we can make it simple on ourselves, we can concentrate on quality and safety, and having a product that we know is stable, that we can count on, that people will be able to use and enjoy, and will treat whatever symptom or disease that they want to treat. That's what we focused on. So we're very focused on flower, and high quality flower to begin with. We're less focused on gummies or beverages or some of these other things that have been a little more difficult for people to get a hold on in other states after years and years of development. That's just the way we're looking at it, but I think that's pretty common.
Gotcha. So the industry's getting rolling. Everyone is building their businesses up. That's very capital intensive. Dan, how are you seeing the cannabis industry respond to financing hurdles, banking hurdles? Is Missouri's medical marijuana industry kind of strapped by that, or is there funding available? Is there banking available? Tell me kind of a general overview about that.
Yeah, that's a good question, Elizabeth. So 2018 and 2019 were 2 real banner years at the macro level for capital raises in cannabis, especially on the public markets. And then at the end of 2019 and turning the corner into 2020, even prior to the COVID-19 crisis hitting here in America, we saw a bit of a constriction in the public markets, which, as that's where the largest multi-state operators are funded, this is a trickle-down effect that we then started seeing permeate throughout the industry. And this is an industry that most conventional banks, as most people viewing this webinar are probably aware of, won't work with the industry. So sources of capital have always been somewhat elusive, hard to come by in the space. And then COVID-19 happened, and the public markets have just gone haywire, and individuals who may be the strong capital partner behind a license or group of licenses there in Missouri or in any other emerging market might have experienced a change in financial position, a liquidity crunch on the personal level that could also be impacting things. And so, it's interesting for me to sit here today and talk to Karin and talk to Chris and hear a little bit more closely about what's going on the ground. Certainly, we at Abaca have seen an increase in inquiries from folks who thought that they had their capital lined up either from a private partner or perhaps from a financial institution that they had thought was going to work with them, and in either case, that's proving to no longer be true. Circumstances have changed. The passage of time alone can create a change in circumstances. A person's financial fortunes could swing in one direction or the other, or you could just walk out the door one day and get hit by a bus. These are all things that we've seen happen in the time period between when cannabis licenses get issued and when those businesses get open. And that's without a pandemic in the middle, taking the entire global economy, turning it upside down, and taking the capital markets along with it. So, as Chris said earlier in this webinar, I also believe that we're going to be hearing from more operators who are having trouble putting in place the capital that they need. Certainly, a company like Abaca is here to help, and there are others out there, but it's a big state, and I imagine we're going to start hearing of this happening more and more. I'd be interested to hear, Chris, how you think this is going to affect some of the deadlines that may exist for getting open, and if you expect to see any license surrender or anything like that going on.
I don't think we'll see many surrenders just because these licenses are pretty valuable or perceived as valuable, especially the cultivation licenses. And I think people will fight to hold on to those and try and make it work. Deadlines, I think, will be blown. Timelines will be blown. I think we need to face it. It is not good out there as far as funding goes. It's not a good situation. The investors aren't there. Investors are backing out. It is challenging is not the right word for it. It's bad. And the sooner that the state of Missouri faces that, the sooner we face that it was bad timing. We just got caught in this. As you said, the markets weren't great before COVID-19, and now they are non-existent as far as investment from what I can see. So we're all going to have to get a little creative. I don't want any of that lack of funding to affect the quality of facilities, the build outs, the quality of the product, and I don't think anybody else does either. So if we have to wait a couple more months in order to get a solid foundation for this industry, I think that's what we should do. And I think that the regulators will see it that way too.
Karin, have you seen any other operators or license holders feeling this pinch?
There actually have been a couple of operators who have surrendered their licenses already. And I think that Chris is spot on with the funding. I think that's going to be a big issue. I think operators will fight tooth and nail to keep them because they're incredibly valuable, but the state's made it difficult to transfer ownership. And that may give some operators no choice but to surrender their licenses if they can't commence.
Gotcha. Well, guys, that concludes our question from me, but I want to open it up to questions from the audience and questions you may have for each other panelists. We've got Brian Bauer here who has any questions. He's monitoring the chat section. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat section of the Zoom, and Brian will go ahead and ask those to the panelists. And while those questions come in, I would like to open it up to Karin, Chris, and Dan to ask each other any questions or add anything that they feel like our viewers may need to know.
I have a question, Karin. I'd love to hear your perspective on this. The availability, or whether it should be available, coronavirus, CARES Act or Families First Act, PPP loans and other funding that's available to small businesses really isn't getting to cannabis businesses. What's your take on that? Should the federal government be a little more understanding? That certainly would be very helpful if we could get, as an industry, some of that money that's going to other small businesses to help prop up the economy in states. And I feel like the cannabis industry could be a really great help to Missouri as far as that's concerned.
I think you're right. And I think that this pandemic may actually create an opportunity for the cannabis industry. There are legislators in Washington now who are fighting to get SBA to be able to give the loans to cannabis industry participants, even ancillary businesses such as mine. I'm an event planner. This is a horrible time to be an event planner. And even ancillary companies are often not eligible for those loans. I really hope that if we can find a silver lining here somewhere, is maybe we can use this to push more legitimacy into the industry on a national level. Really, they just need to deschedule, and that solves all our problems. So, but they absolutely need to make these resources available to the cannabis industry. Absolutely need to do that. Hopefully they will.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. We're in unprecedented is the phrase that gets thrown around a lot lately, but as we've seen in a number of states where the medical and adult use cannabis programs were already operational prior to the coronavirus crisis really taking root, states have declared the cannabis industry essential. We talked about this a bit in our webinar last week. These are businesses that are on the essential list. These are employees who have to take enhanced personal risk to continue serving their patient base, and these are owners who have to make adaptations using capital out of their own pocket because, as you know, as we just said, the vast majority of these programs under the CARES Act and otherwise are not applicable to cannabis businesses. And so this duality really took a national spotlight. On one hand, people are seeing it's great for the movement in general, for people all over the country to see not just how legitimate these businesses are, but how ingrained they have become into the communities where they operate, but also to see that happening at the same time where these operators are being shut out of federal aid that's helping other businesses. And so it's unfortunate for the industry, but it's also absolutely advancing our cause, and that gives me hope. In Missouri, especially though, the timing adds to that. It's kind of a double whammy. Even if this PPP funding, for example, could help cannabis businesses, the way those loans are structured, it's based primarily on your payroll in the past. And so for a new business that's getting started and just getting ramped up, the benefits just aren't there either, regardless of what industry you're in. So the cards are stacked against new businesses and startups, and the cards are also stacked somewhat against the cannabis industry. But you know, as Chris said, one thing I think we're all faithful in, have a lot of faith in, is demand, and that's going to keep going strong.
I think we have a question from the audience. A question from the audience here, and this is going back to Chris, and I think it's on the capital question, which is, you know, either how are you or how do you see other operators getting creative given the limitation on the capital while not cutting corners to roll out their operations?
Companies like Abaca, trying to form creative banking relationships, using property, real estate transactions to fund tenant improvement is a big one. Using developers, private developers, to inject cash and then signing a lease with that developer in order to get the operation up and running. Looking under couch cushions, everything we can think of, and then just moving forward with a design that is something we feel comfortable with, that would produce something that we are proud to sell, but maybe is a little bit of value engineered. I would say, and I'll put this out to the panel to see what you guys think about it. It would be very helpful, I think, to the industry in Missouri if the Department of Health would come out and take a stand, now that we've had this pandemic and we have some changed circumstances, would take a position on phasing in cultivations. Because I don't know any group that really is able to stand up their entire operation on day one. And if the state would take a position on phasing in these cultivations, I think you'd see a lot of people wiping their brow and giving a sigh of relief.
You know, I would say the phased approach worked in Arkansas, where we saw delays due to lawsuits and other things. And, you know, if we were able to get the flexibility to implement a phased approach here, I certainly have no doubt that it can be done safely and responsibly in Missouri. And, you know, that I can't really think of any reason not to do it, other than perhaps, you know, fear of the unknown. And so you've got regulators who maybe don't fully understand the risk. If you can show them examples, you know, from other states and your plans, how you can keep a facility secure, how you can have you know, cultivation going on in a secure area where there's perhaps construction going on that is, you know, fundamentally less secure elsewhere in the building, it's absolutely doable. And I absolutely do think it would help timelines if you're able to get that done. So I would certainly support that. I think the state would allow phased openings for cultivation facilities.
Well, I was thinking, Chris actually meant something around. And I don't know. We've actually had some conversations about this because they do require that people kind of hit the ground running and have their full development. And you can lose your license if you are not meeting what the requirements are for your square footage. I think they're going to have to. I think that, I mean, they've been pretty cooperative about modifying rules and regulations as they have found that things really end up impinging on the industry and not being helpful. The whole idea is to get safe medication to patients as quickly as possible. And I think that they are starting to see that this is something they're going to have to address. Chris is absolutely right about that. They really need to do something about the phased in.
Well, this is, one of those opportunities where we're thankful for industry advocates like you and your team over there at McHugh Trade to be advancing the interests of patients and operators, especially through these kind of confusing times. So, I'll share your optimism there. It sounds like the state's been pretty flexible to date, which is very encouraging. And I would hope we'll see some more relief on phased openings and maybe on some of those hard deadlines as well.
We've got another question, and it's about the importance of social equity in cannabis and in the rollout, really addressing the question more of on a nationwide scale and how important it is, and maybe if there's any specifics to the Missouri market as well where social equity is concerned in the cannabis industry.
Yeah, Karin, you're probably best educated to speak to that.
Probably. I do not think we've done a fantastic job of making sure we have a diverse industry. I think that we definitely have a lot of work to do on that front. After we passed the initiative and we started working on implementation, there were some efforts to affect the rules and regulations in a way that would help the industry be more diverse here. But that, in my opinion, has not happened the way that it should have, and we have a lot of work to do on that front. I'm hoping that once we get back to whatever our new normal looks like, that there will be an opportunity for some conversations around that in Missouri, and we're working on some plans to help maybe try to initiate some of those conversations.
I think Karin is being kind to the industry with her words. I think that I'm reading the question here, and the question is, are we too far gone? And I think, unfortunately, the answer is probably yes. Not that we shouldn't keep trying, but the social equity programs that have been rolled out in other states, frankly, haven't been that great to begin with. They haven't been that well designed, and they haven't done well. The results haven't been good. I think we need to face that. I am more encouraged, though, with the second part of the question, which is, do customers seek social equity in their cannabis purchases? Yes, they do. They actually do. And if you can put a program forward that you can brand and market, and it's real, and people can see that it's real, that you're really helping a segment in a social equity manner, they will spend money at your business, and they will buy your product just because of that. So I think maybe if we can incorporate a little bit of that success into the industry, maybe there is some hope.
That's a great answer. That's a really real answer, and something that the industry will have to look deep down within. We've got 10 minutes left, about 10 minutes left, so I want to encourage folks to ask any questions if you have any, and Brian will pipe them into the panel here. Just kind of a fun little roundabout here. What do you all look forward to the most when the Missouri medical marijuana market finally opens?
This is a sort of a legal nerd perspective, but I'm looking forward to proving out the concept that Karin and others, and unfortunately I didn't do my part of the drive to get this law passed, this constitutional amendment. But I think it's a great framework, and I think it's really going to be it's going to be a beacon for the industry and for the country on how to do this right. The rollout, while it's had its problems, has been one of the smoothest rollouts I think that we've ever seen in any state. That part of that is due to the Department of Health and the people there and the team there that have done a great job in general. But part of that's due to the way the law was structured. And I just think it's going to end up being a really great basis for a wonderful industry in the state. And I also want to prove to those guys on the coast that Missouri can do it better. I don't like being looked down upon by these guys from California and Oregon and Washington and on the East Coast and say, you guys are flyover country and you shouldn't be growing marijuana there in the first place. I don't agree with that. I think we can do a great job, and I think they're going to be looking to us in a couple of years saying, well, how are you guys doing such a great job? What can we do to be like you?
That's great. Very optimistic. Karin, what about you? What do you look forward to the most?
I kind of agree with Chris. As a patient, as a consumer, I'm looking forward to being able to walk into a dispensary and choose a strain that I know will work for me and know that I'm getting lab tested medicine that will help my condition. I have rheumatoid arthritis. So from a patient perspective, that's what I'm looking for. But I agree with Chris. I really think that Missouri is poised to be the hub of the Midwest cannabis industry. And I think that once we have cultivators producing and we have dispensaries open, our products are most definitely going to rival California, Nevada, and everywhere else. And I'm really looking forward to introducing the Missouri products to the rest of the world.
Great. Dan, what are you looking forward to?
Well, as a medical cannabis patient who lives just south of the Missouri border here in Arkansas, I'm looking forward to seeing what Karin is talking about there, seeing some of that cannabis that I think you guys are probably right is going to compete with anywhere in the country. There's no reason that it can't be done. But, I'm a legal nerd like Chris, and it's really fascinating from both a legal and an economic perspective to see a new industry take shape with new and different wrinkles and quirks in every state. As I said before, and I'll say it again, I think you guys in Missouri have done a really tremendous job of putting together a program that has all early indications of being very robust and successful. And so as somebody who has a company that is a service provider for that industry, what I'm looking forward the most is really just seeing it all, get up and get started and being there with you guys to be a part of it. It's exciting stuff. It seems like forever ago, even though it was really just 6 or 7 weeks ago, we were all there in St. Louis at the Expo that Karin and her team did such an awesome job putting together. And pretty soon this industry will be able to gather again and celebrate its accomplishments. And when they do, I think there will be a lot to reflect upon. So I'm excited to see it all happen.
Great. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left, so I'll let the panelists say any closing remarks or advice for folks that might be listening and navigating these waters, anything that you think that the audience can learn from, and give folks a little bit more time to ask any questions if they have any. But Dan, just go ahead. We'll start with you and then go to Karin and then Chris. One more thing to add to what Karin said she's most looking forward to. Again, I'm also a patient. I get severe migraines, had one last night. And, there is just something very, very rewarding and liberating about being able to walk into a cannabis dispensary in your home state, especially here in so-called flyover country, and speak to an educated professional and purchase a cannabis strain that will help you. After years and years of, let's just say, not being able to do it that way, and certainly not in our home state, it was very, very liberating for me to have that experience for the first time last year here in Arkansas. So I very much look forward to you and all your fellow patients in Missouri getting to have that experience in your home state here in Missouri very soon. And, again, from the perspective of the folks at Abaca, we're excited to be part of it with you guys. It's, again, I think you guys really are going to be an example for how to do this right, and we're excited to be right there with everybody.
It is exciting, and I would just like to encourage, if you have questions about the Missouri industry, you're looking for resources, to visit mocantrade.org. The Trade Association is a tremendous resource for the industry here in Missouri, and if you have questions about it, a really fantastic place to start.
Chris, do you have any parting advice for other members of the industry or for any of the viewers?
Yes. So first, let me take the opportunity to say I feel so privileged to be a part of the industry, particularly in Missouri. It's so much fun, regardless of the challenges that we have. It's almost addictive to be a part of this, to meet people like Karin, to work with them. And I'd echo that MoCann Trade. If you're in Missouri and you're in the industry and you're not a part of MoCann Trade, you're making a big mistake. You need to get involved with that group because they are an amazing resource. I've never seen anything like it. But to anyone out there who is in the industry in Missouri, who's trying to stand up a business and is discouraged about all the nasty things I said about the environment in Missouri, please don't give up. We're all in it together. We're all experiencing the same problems. You've got a good foundation here in Missouri. You've got a good regulatory group and team. They will work with people. We're going to get through this, and we're going to do it together, and it's going to be great. It's just going to be a little challenging, but who wants it to be easy, right?
Yeah, I think there's an idiom, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it, right? Well, I think that concludes our webinar for the day. I want to thank you all for registering and sticking it out the whole hour discussing the current state of the Missouri medical marijuana market. We look forward to the future. Abaca will be hosting more of these webinars, so be sure to sign up to receive the CannFi report on goabaca.com. And we'll be sending out periodic emails inviting you to other webinars and releasing more information from around the country. So thank you all so much, and I hope you have a great weekend.